Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom in our continuing discussion of nationalism as it sweeps over the continent of Europe, right? And we are now talking about nationalism as a driving force behind unification, right? We are discussing how nationalism and its idea in the 1800s is going to lead to all these different principalities and all these different little states that all happen to speak the same language and have a shared common cultural interest are going to decide to unify themselves together and create some new self-determined nation states, right? Thank you, Mr. Dan Gillian. But the big thing about it, though, is we left off in class talking about Italy, right? And today, in this flip, we're going to talk about Germany. One of my favorite subjects to talk about is their unification struggle, right? Now, going into it, though, I just want to go ahead and say, yes, I know that this is late on a Sunday. I apologize, but I had a lot of stuff to do this weekend and stuff like that, including going and reffing a Jesuit Baton Rouge Catholic game, and it was awful. But anyway, now, big thing about it, though, is if there's this channel on YouTube that kept this whole thing, the entirety of the German unification, to 9 minutes, right? And if they can do that, I think I can keep this around 18 minutes or under. But let's pick up where we left off in class and let's get after it, right? So I'm not going to dawdle too much on slides. I'm going to try not to over-explain anything. Now, what we left off on, though, was talking about nationalism in Italy, right? We talked about how Italy is going to be officially created as a country as of 1861, right? And when this happens, Italy is going to be created as a parliamentary monarchy, right? They are going to have a limited monarchy with a constitution and a liberalized government that is actually going to be underneath this guy, Victor Emmanuel II, right? Right after Garibaldi gives over all the states that he took over in the south, right? Remember, in Italy, we had two parallel movements going on, right? One in the north, one in the south, right? The one in the north is trying to get Austria out of northern Italy with France as their ally. The one in the south is doing a guerrilla warfare with Garibaldi taking over, inspiring the red shirt whole deal, right? They unify together. But the thing about it, though, is that we have to understand is even though that story makes perfect sense, two parallel movements, they unify together, nationalism didn't fix all their problems, right? North Italy was still very, very industrious and quick to progress underneath Count Cavour and Victor Emmanuel II, who had started that process already, whereas southern Italy was still very, very agrarian and very slow pace, right? And it's still like that to this day. The Papal States also did not join Italy until 1870. Anarchist rebellions are going to break out in the 1900s. Like, you have to understand, Italy was a hotbed for the rise of anarchism and anarchy itself throughout, like, most of Europe, right? Like, literally, Cecilia, like Franz Joseph's wife, the Emperor of Austria after 1848, is going to literally be stabbed to death by an Italian anarchist, right? So going into it, though, also, Italian immigration is going to have a major, major, major hit on Italy as well. Southern Italians are going to heavily immigrate to the United States and other industrialized countries, and then also only 0.5 million people could vote out of the 22 million Italian citizens. So what we're trying to understand is that conservative values are still trying to hold on and stuff like that, even in these new nationalized liberal states. But now what we're talking about is the unification of Germany, right? And we have to understand that the idea of a unified Germany had been around for quite some time already, right? When we call back to the Frankfurt Parliament, right, when we understand that the Revolution of 1848 centered around the idea of creating that unified Germany, right? And then, of course, Prince Frederick Wilhelm IV is going to throw that crown that he got from the gutter out because he's like, I refuse to be a constitutional monarch, right? So the thing about it, though, also that you need to understand is that the idea of a unified Germany was also being created along economic lines, right? So the Germans had already begun to create this very, very interesting thing called the Zollverein, right? Now, be careful if you ever decide to Google this thing. If you Google the word Zollverein, you'll get a picture of this place, right? That is not the Zollverein I'm talking about. That right there is the Zollverein coal mine that is actually in Essen, Germany, that I actually took that picture when I went to go visit there. This past summer, right? The Zollverein I'm talking about is a German trade customs union that looked like this, right? Where basically all the German states, right, that were then formerly in the Confederation, right, that were now in the German Confederation, had an agreement, right? And their agreement was, we will stop charging tariffs and excise taxes, and we will allow products to freely move between our borders because we all speak German and we share a common interest, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is this was mostly led by Prussia, and Austria wasn't allowed inside of it, right? So something we need to understand already is that Prussia is going to be the leader of not only this Zollverein, but also of German unification, right? The Prussians are going to be the ones who push it forward rather than the Austrians, right? Now, who is leading Prussia in this concept of the Zollverein, right? That is, of course, going to be the stream that leads us into unification, because if we can all make money together, we can probably all unify together, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is who is leading them. It is Wilhelm I, the brother of actual Frederick Wilhelm IV, the gutter crown guy, Wilhelm I, and another guy by the name of Otto von Bismarck. Now, notice I have Otto von Bismarck in all capital letters because he's just that important, right? Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm are both conservative leaders, but they are taking the impetus a la Napoleon III, realizing that to actually unify these states together, to actually get these things done, to be a powerful country these days, you must progress with liberal ideas, right? You have to bring in and integrate liberal ideas to keep the middle class happy, so they keep investing their money in the economy and everything continues to grow, right? And so they want to nationalize. They decide that they want Prussia to be in charge of this, though. They want Prussia to be the leadership, the flag holder, the flag bearer of the unification of the German states. And they feel as though the only way to do this is by doing it in a truly Prussian manner, right? And that's by increasing the size of the military, because let's never forget Prussian militarism, right? The Prussians love their military, going all the way back to Frederick the Great Elector, going all the way up to the very first kings of Prussia. They always loved the idea of a Prussian military. Remember the Soldatenkönig, right? When we talked about absolutism and we talked about King Frederick William I and stuff like that of Prussia, he was all about militarism, right? Napoleon once said that Prussia hatched out of a cannonball. Now, also other people in Europe said that Prussia was just a military with a state, right? So they want to nationalize by doubling the size of the army in case a war breaks out, because they know good and well by looking at Italy, wars are going to break out if you try to nationalize, right? The middle class, though, rejected this idea, and the liberals were like, they don't like the idea of supporting militarism because it takes tax money away from them to go towards the military, right? So, but the thing is militarism is a Prussian tradition. So what are Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm going to do when the liberals protest the idea of increasing taxes to actually increase the size of the military? They don't really care because they feel as though military and war are a constant theme during German unification, and they're just going to do it anyway, right? So so we have to remember something key right here, is that these conservative leaders are even realizing and looking down the pipe going, if I'm going to actually be able to integrate liberal ideas, we do still have to do it in our way, right? So they actually don't even listen to the middle-class liberals. They increase the size of the military. They increase the size and the budget of military spending, and they grow their military exponentially, right? And they end up with a very, very large military right before they start getting into some wars, right? Because you have to understand that Otto von Bismarck was a very, very famous figure in European history. Otto von Bismarck is a guy that I would love to add to y'all's bracket, right? Because he's just that important, right? If Mr. Wooderson saw Otto von Bismarck on one of y'all's drafted teams, he'd freak out because he loves this guy, right? And also, he has a lot of very famous quotes, like always keep two irons in the fire. One of my favorite quotes by Otto von Bismarck is, laws are a lot like sausages. Everybody loves them, but nobody wants to see them get made, right? And now the biggest one, though, that kind of demonstrates his idea of growing the military to unify the German states together is he says the great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and resolutions, but by blood and iron, right? And he literally is basically saying that the military and industrialism will be the things that unify the German people together, right? And at the Prussian standard of militarism, he's already halfway there, right? So going into it, though, Bismarck proved himself, right? Proved himself correct the second that a war broke out, right? And he wants to use that German-Prussian militaristic idea to demonstrate to the German people why you should be together, right? And so Bismarck proved this during this first war known as the Second Schleswig War, okay? Now, Schleswig is how you say these provinces, right? And it's actually Schleswig-Holstein, right? Schleswig-Holstein. Now, Schleswig and Holstein are in the northern area of what at the time was called the German Confederation, because as we remember, Napoleon comes in, destroys the Holy Roman Empire, he turns it into the Confederation of the Rhine, then Napoleon gets exiled, and the Congress of Vienna turns it into the German Confederation, right? This loose conglomeration of states, right? Which is basically just the Holy Roman Empire with a new name, but we're not going to get into that right now, okay? But so the thing about it is there's two provinces in the northern territories of the German Confederation, right? And they're known as Schleswig up here and Holstein down there, right? And so the thing about it, though, is what's going to happen is the King of Denmark and the Danes are going to try to bring those two states into their kingdom, right? They write a new constitution that includes Schleswig and Holstein as a part of their new nation state. Well, Otto von Bismarck is like, whoa, wait a minute. Schleswig and Holstein are traditionally German. They speak German. They do German things. They have German songs. They have the German language. They have German foods, right? Those are German people. You will not bring our people into your new nation state, you dirty, rotten Danes, right? So he starts a war with them, right? And this war lasts about 9 months. And he actually gets Austria to help him. Like, he actually gets Austria to help him. He was like, look, Austrians, you speak German too. Y'all have your giant empire that's got all these other people in it as well. But we can benefit actually properly if we actually liberate these people from the Danes, right? And the war only lasted 9 months. Austria and Germany come in and they slap everybody in the face and they end up winning this war, right? And this war actually broke out in 1864, right? And so this is considered step one to German unification, right? Because what is going to end up happening is just like in Italy, it inspires a lot of those German states to join up with Prussia, and it creates a new conglomerated territory in the north, and Prussia grows its borders, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is now what's coming up is a question of Klein Deutschland or Großdeutschland, right? So those are two German words that are actually translated into Klein Deutschland means big Germany, and Großdeutschland means, wait, no, other way around. That's silly. I speak German. I know better than that. Klein Deutschland means little Germany. Großdeutschland means big Germany, right? Because gross means large and klein means small, right? So the idea that we're putting out there is now what's happening is the rest of Europe is kind of looking at this German unification process, and everyone is wondering, is it going to be a little Germany, which is going to be all German-speaking territories within the German Confederation being led by Prussia, right? Which means that only people that live there will speak German, right? Or is it going to be this Großdeutschland concept, which is going to be with Austria in charge, right? Because Austria, if they're involved, is going to not only control the new German country, but also a lot of these other territories like Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, and all these Slavs that they also control under the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy by this point, right? Or Austria-Hungary. As of 1867, they become a dual monarchy, right? Well, the thing about it is which idea do you think Prussia supports? Prussia supports that little Germany idea because it puts them in charge, right? And so the thing that is big about this is now Prussia is going to have to turn on its ally that just helped them in that war. And then this war is known as the Ostr Prussian War, right? Ostr Prussian War is going to break out between Germany and Austria because literally what ends up happening is Schleswig goes to Prussia and Holstein goes to Austria. But the thing about it is Schleswig and Holstein are inside that Zollverein, right? But Austria is not. So just to even access their own territory, they'd have to go into the Zollverein, pay customs duties, and then go out of the Zollverein and pay him again, right? And so Austria goes up to Ovon Bismar and Kaiser Wilhelm, and they're like, hey, can we sit down and talk about this and how this doesn't seem very fair? And then Ovon Bismarck accuses the Austrians of treating them like enemies, right? And so a war breaks out. This is called the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. It only lasted 7 weeks, right? 7 weeks. We're talking about a month and a half, right? A month and a half, and the Prussians just smack the Austrians right in their dirty, rotten mouth, right? And the reason why is because no one supported Austria. It was Austria pretty much by themselves with a couple of small handful of allies. And the big one that they were missing, though, was Russia, okay? Now, remember all the way back to the Crimean War, right? The Crimean War was Russia versus everybody else. Their longtime ally was always Austria. When the revolutions of 1848 broke out, the Austrians were like, hey, we have some revolutions going down. Russia, can you come help us? Russia showed up, helped them suppress those actual revolts, right? Thing about it, though, is when the Crimean War broke out in the 1850s, the Austrians declared themselves neutral, so the Russians took this personally. So in this war, when the Russians could have gotten involved and really helped the Austrians beat the Prussians, they decided not to. Because they were like, you know what, Austria? You declared yourself neutral that last time, so you know what? We're neutral this time, right? And that's why this war, one reason why this war lasted such a short amount of time. Secondary reason is just because the Italians are going to help the Prussians as well, right? Gotta love that nationalism trend going on. And the third reason is technology, right? The biggest reason why the Prussians were able to decimate the Austrians is because of the difference in these two guns that you see right here. The Prussians were sporting this gun right here, known as the Dreisse needle gun, while the Austrians were still sporting this bad boy, which is a musket, right? Now, the best trained people in the world with a musket can fire about 2 shots per minute. An untrained Prussian soldier can fire 6 shots a minute with a Dreisse needle gun because it's no longer a muzzle-loading actual gun. It is a breech-loading gun. See this bolt right back here? You push it up like that, pull it back, slide a pre-packed bullet in there, punch it back, pow! And you can just let off several more shots than an Austrian military man can. So the Prussians that were able to use their increased technology, which represents Prussian industrialism, something else that's going to be really big, because the Prussians are going to really focus on their military and their industry, right? And the Dreisse needle gun is a great example of that, right? Now, the armistice was very generous to Austria as well. Prussia actually proposed this to them and said, look, we can end this war right now, and we can make this very kind to you, okay? And so that's another reason why this actually ended in just 7 weeks. They said, Austria, you don't have to pay any reparations. They also said, Austria, you're not going to lose any territory whatsoever, except Venice, which is going to be given to Italy. sorta. They actually gave it to France, and then France gave it to Italy and stuff like that later on, but it's not a big deal. So Austria is going to have to also withdraw from German affairs. And so basically Prussia just says, after this war, you got to keep your nose out of our business. We are trying to unify this whole thing together. Just leave us alone. Now Bismarck also has to tame his parliament, right? So the thing about it, though, okay, and then the Austrians agreed to all this, and he has to try and keep these middle-class people happy, because now you're turning into a country. You're now turning into a nation state, right? You're beginning that new process. So he gives them a constitution, and he creates a constitutional monarchy, right? And what he decides to do in this constitution is he wants to consolidate all the principalities into states, and each of them gets their own local government, right? And it gets to keep their own local government. He also introduces a new liberal idea where all men under the age of 25 can vote, so universal suffrage for men under the age of 25. He also establishes a new legislative body known as the Reichstag, which actually means the ruling house, right? So now that right there, of course, is the old Reichstag that was actually developed in the North German Confederation. This is the modern-day Reichstag, which is super, super cool, and it's in Berlin, and I was actually there this past summer. Now, going into it, though, he actually creates this new Reichstag, which is a legislative house, which will actually have a very, very large parliamentary procedure. Bismarck is also only responsible to the Kaiser. He says the Chancellor is only responsible or answerable to the Kaiser. It is not answerable to the Reichstag, right? And the Kaiser and the Chancellor were allowed to keep control of the army, right? Which is another really big thing as well. So what he's doing is he's giving the liberals a little something to keep them happy, to keep this whole process rolling, right? And so now the unification of Germany, though, is going to take a very, very large turn, though, because at this phase, Prussia was actually now known as the North German Confederation, or they were the largest state inside of this new thing known as the North German Confederation, right? So this is the new form of what is about to become Germany, right? So Prussia is still the biggest state out of all of them, but all these little other principalities like Schleswig and Holstein were allowed to use their own like local government and actually elect members to the Reichstag as well. Now the question, though, is there is a big chunk of Germany that's not involved yet. It's this lower, like, southern territory that many of you may have heard of before, known as Bavaria, right? Bavaria is also home to Munich, right? Now, how do we get the traditionally Catholic Bavaria, who has a completely different German dialect, who also sees themselves as different? Even to this day, there are Bavarians that think they shouldn't be a part of Germany. I'm not kidding you, right? Bavarians really, really do consider themselves to be very intrinsically different from the rest of Germany, right? Now, that's a sectionalism idea. Well, sectionalistically speaking, how are you going to get those Catholic Bavarians to be on board with this whole North German Confederation idea and this new idea of Germany? Well, how about let's bond over a common enemy, right? The Bavarians and the North German Confederation both don't like the French. So how about we make the French look like the aggressors, and if we actually make it look like this, they'll come to support us in a war, so let's start a war with France. How about we go out there and let's pick a fight, right? So Bismarck is going to taunt France into a war, right? Mostly due to the fact that they're actually down here in Spain, the king died with no heir to the throne. And the next person that was actually eligible to actually inherit the throne was a guy named Leopold. And he actually turns out to be cousins with Kaiser Wilhelm I. He is a Hohenzollern, so he is actually a German man, right? And so this means that France is getting a little freaked out because that means that there will be a German sympathetic Spain and a Germany on this side. So he basically, Napoleon III, sends a telegram to Kaiser Wilhelm I saying, tell your cousin not to take the throne, right? Kaiser Wilhelm then responds back to him very politely, I will not commit myself to telling my cousin not to take the throne because that's not right, okay? Otto von Bismarck then takes the telegram and says, let's spice this up a little bit. And he edits it to make it look like Kaiser Wilhelm brushed off Napoleon III and insulted him, right? And he published it in every major newspaper in Europe, right? And so what it ends up making it look like is that basically Kaiser Wilhelm had said, get out of my face, French guy, right? But in reality, right, like Kaiser Wilhelm was actually being very, very kind. Now, going into it, though, this will start a war. And it actually leads directly to this thing called the Franco Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, right? And the German forces are going to overwhelm the French, mostly due to the fact that they had better railways, better technology, a larger military, and then also Catholic Bavaria will side with the North German Confederation, beefing up their military, right? And also due to the fact that a lot of little things happened that made this war so short, but also led to such an embarrassing French defeat. Napoleon III is going to be captured at this place called the Battle of Sedan. You can literally see Napoleon III right here and Otto von Bismarck sitting on chairs next to each other, talking to each other, because at the Battle of the Sedan, the French forces were overwhelmed. They captured Napoleon III, and what that's going to lead to is back in Paris, they're going to have another revolution where they literally overthrow their government. They're like, Napoleon III is no longer our emperor and president. We have something new. And they call it the Paris Commune, right? They have a communist revolution in Paris. I kid you not. It's crazy. Doesn't last for very long, though, because the thing called the Bloody Week goes down, right? When what the Prussians do to try and actually get the French to surrender is they surround the entirety of Paris with a large military, and they start bombarding the ever-loving snot using artillery shells out of Paris. This is what it looked like when the Prussians were done with it. Look at the destroyed buildings. Look at the dishevelment. There's the Arc de Triomphe and stuff like that. It's like the only thing left standing on the Champs-Élysées, right? And so they literally do this, and the Parisians try their best to hold out for a very long time because they basically are like the Prussians are trying to starve them out. It got so bad that the French turned to eating zoo animals, right? They literally went to the zoo and started eating animals from the zoo. You can actually see this French menu. It literally just says like, ooh, le civet de kangaroo, which means like a fillet of kangaroo. This is a consommé of elephant right there. There's also like some dishes that include rats on them and stuff like that. So what's also right here, this is actually a canine dog butcher shop, right? Like so, which is really screwed up because they just refuse to surrender to the Germans. But eventually what happens is starvation does take hold, the German bombardment takes hold, and the French end up surrendering. And after 7 months in the starvation campaign by the Prussians, the French do surrender. And embarrassingly, the unification of Germany happens in none other than the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. Germany was declared an empire in the Hall of Mirrors, in the Palace of Versailles, and they then forced the French to pay 5 billion francs in reparations after the Germans destroyed their city. The French and Germans have hated each other ever since then. Now, France is going to have to cede also this very important territory called Alsace-Lorraine, which is where Alfred Dreyfus was originally from, right? And this anger would lead to a creation of several defensive alliances that would protect the Germans from France. These alliances would then later on lead to World War I. But that is where we're going to cut it off. We're going to be like wrapping it up right there. So y'all going to have the rest of your weekend. Got it in about like 21 minutes, but I'll see y'all soon.